sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that takes everything you know and love and slowly but surely deconstructs it to its core elements. It can be painful, but pain can be fun too. I'm Bianca, and with me as always is Christy Powell, who deconstructs concepts for a living.
Howdy, how are y'all doing tonight?
And with us this evening is Erin, an exotic dancer, pastry chef, and atheist writer. That's what's known as the Trifecta here on SexX.
Hello.
Hi, it's lovely to talk with you tonight. I'm so excited for this conversation. So this week we're going to be talking about deconstruction and how important it is to finding yourself and your true life's goals.
That's right. We are breaking down dancing and dissent. So hit us up. We're at 512-991-9242, 991-9242. Or you can call the show at tiny.cc/callsex because the show is starting right now.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Erin. I'm really excited to talk with you, especially because you kind of embody a lot of different things that we like to talk about here on Secular Sexuality, embracing our own sexuality and pursuing that in the ways we like best, and then bring in the atheist component. And of course, pastries are everybody's favorite topic. So let's dive in first to the how you became a dancer and kind of that background. So can you talk us through how this became your career path?
Well, it certainly wasn't something I thought I was going to do when, I was a little girl. I actually wanted to be a lawyer. But I had kind of a rough teenage years when I broke out of my preppy bookworm type thing. And I ended up graduating high school early. And so I was 17 when I moved out. And I really didn't like working a regular job. I started out working at McDonald's because I was 17, and I moved on to like a call center. And I had really, I really needed something else. And I just didn't fit very well with, frankly, I had a really hard time with any kind of authority. And that's pretty much been my whole life. And I had answered an ad to be an out call, like bachelor party girl. So like where you go to people's houses and you jump out of the cake and that kind of thing. And I was turned down
Nice.
Dramatically. It was horrible. And a couple of months later, I decided to try again, and I ended up answering an ad to be a topless waitress. A week after that, they told me, "You're a terrible waitress. Would you like to dance?" And then they said, "Well, actually, you're either going to dance or you're not going to have a job," and which is pretty much like getting fired anyway, because I was an independent contractor. So you are self-employed. So at 18, I became an all-nude dancer, and I really liked it. I had gotten bullied a lot. I was very insecure about my looks as a kid, and dancing really helped me come into myself. It gave me a lot of control over my life. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the freedom of it. And I still have a real problem with authority.
Don't we all?
Never
Yeah,
really
that's
grew
kind
out
of the
that.
theme here. That's really. Oh, sorry, Christy, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious. I'm sorry to take the spotlight off of your story, but having worked in the industry, I'm wondering if that is a common tactic or maybe something that, current and prospective dancers might want to be concerned about. If, getting hired to serve cocktails or work some other part of the business only to then be sort of like bait and switch pushed into a different position is part of the industry, or if that's more just your story.
That's hard to say, because I know that in my area, what my particular scenario was pretty common. That was just how they did it. But to be honest, because I was a topless waitress, I was already on the stage list. So I was already a dancer. I was just serving drinks and collecting minimum wage. That was really the main difference. So I guess it sounds pretty slimy, but I was already like halfway there. So it was sort of like
Sure.
starter. But I really can't speak to other markets per se, because that's the only place I started. And every other place I danced after that, I went there as a dancer. So, but I do know in my particular case in 1997, that was pretty common for where I was.
Yeah, well, and I definitely don't mean to paint the whole industry in any kind of seedy light, but there is the potential for exploitation when we're talking about contract workers and younger folks getting their entry level jobs, and things to be mindful for. So I appreciate you just kind of speaking to that.
Oh, I would absolutely say that. Yeah, if you're walking into any type of business like this, especially because they tend to look for younger girls and things like that, it's absolutely something to look out for. Because I was so suspicious of anybody trying to tell me what to do, I was already in a mode to like fight. So I really wasn't in a position that other girls may be and definitely are to be exploited, because I was already ready to. I think I was only there 6 months when I actually stared down the owner, who I found out later happened to be a member of a biker gang. My story could have ended right there. And I actually lectured him on the contract and independent contractor of law in California. I think he probably thought it was funny. I think that's probably the only reason that like I didn't end up in a really bad situation, is that he was probably like, this little girl's like yelling at me and staring at me. So, but no, you're absolutely right. It's not something to go into with your eyes closed. They definitely are on the lookout for girls that are naive and ready to be taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of thank you for bringing that up too, Christy, because I appreciate you. That's definitely something we want to be mindful of. We are championing sex work on this show and making sure that we are destigmatizing it as much as possible, but that doesn't mean that we can turn a blind eye to some of the more questionable areas of that industry. And hopefully talking about it is one way to begin the process of changing. So I guess my next question for you, Erin, is we kind of touched on it a little bit, starting out with how you got to be a dancer, that struggle of realizing, oh, I'm in a position where I need to make this decision and go all in or lose my job. What are some other struggles you've faced, or what about rewards, just unexpected things that you've been confronted by as you've pursued this?
I think one of the most frustrating things when it comes to dancing is you don't have a set income. You don't know what you're going to make every night. So when you're living on your own and, you're supporting yourself, you don't know, you need that income. And it's almost like you can get into a negative circle where you're not making money. You take it personally because you're making money off your looks. So now, well, I'm not making money because I'm ugly, or, a plethora of other reasons. And you start taking it personally. You go in the next night, your confidence is shot, and you end up in this horrible cycle where your self-esteem is damaged, and then your income suffers because of it. And then you have to figure out a way to bring yourself back up. And then on the flip side of that, you have nights where it's like all of a sudden you're a movie star. People are telling you how awesome you are and how beautiful you are, and like handing you cash, and you can't sit down because you're so busy. And so I think it's that endless up and down. It's really an emotional roller coaster that you kind of willingly put yourself in.
Sounds like being a YouTuber.
I've noticed a lot of parallels when it comes to writing and social media, where that ego boost pushes you to do more. And then when I've made a couple of jokes, on Twitter and things like that have fallen flat. And then I'm like, oh. You're like, oh, I'm not funny.
There's nothing worse than a tweet you think is going to hit real hard and it gets like 2 likes and you're like, oh no, I'm a terrible.
No, I might push back on that. The worst is when you write a joke and people take it seriously. And now you're like either having to explain it
Like, oh,
or
no.
you're like, oh, wait, I wasn't looking for, like, it was a joke though.
That's
Apparently
one
not
thing
a
we
good
still
one.
need to get right. We still need to get that sarcasm font going. All right. So those are some of the more, that's something I haven't really thought about, and definitely something I can see some parallels in, just that spiral of being in front of an audience, whether that's in real life or virtually. How about some things that you needed to deconstruct? So the theme of the night is deconstruction, and I'm curious what you found yourself personally taking apart about your worldview as you're excelling in this job and becoming more comfortable in this position. What are some things that maybe you're bumping up against and saying, oh, I had this assumption about X and actually it's Y instead?
It's hard to say. I'm trying to think. I guess really my major my assumption when I came in is that I had talked to, I can't remember who it was that told me. It was either a manager or another girl or something like that had told me that I was going to be making at least $500 a night, if not more, always consistently every night. So I think I had been dancing for about a week, and I went to a luxury car lot, and I was like, well, this is what I'm going to be making. I'm going to be making $20,000 a month. So, let's take a look at that Jaguar. So I definitely had to reconstruct how I thought about money, finances. That was difficult. When it came to myself, I really grew up with some hangups about how I looked. I'm really short. I'm really pale. I have a lot of freckles. I got teased a lot by the way I looked. And so embracing who I was as opposed to trying to be somebody different, that was really a big, there was a lot of learning and growth that happened there. I met my best friend shortly after I started dancing, and I was really jealous of her. She had blonde hair down to her ankles, just like seriously one of the most beautiful people. You just look at her and you're like, oh, I hate her. And then I met her and I realized she was just as insecure as me, but her insecurity ended up affecting the way that I presented myself, because she basically, I guess we're not friends anymore. And one of the reasons a red flag for me is when she called me her midge to her Barbie, right? Because she was a big blonde one and I was the short with her boobs, right? So that should have been a light for me, and it wasn't. But she dressed me up in ways. She thought that I should look like Janis Joplin. So I had a routine that I did in bell bottoms, which is extremely difficult to get out of on stage, by the way. And so I really let her kind of control the way that I looked, the way that I performed. I'm into heavy metal, have been since I was about 13 years old, that whole problem with authority thing probably. And that's what I really wanted. And that's who I was. And until I was able to let her go, or at least stop her from controlling how I looked, because I admired her so much. And I wanted to be blonde and tall, and, I wasn't going to be that. I had to be who I was, and I had to be the best version of me that I could be. And it took a minute to get there. It took a while.
I'd imagine that's also very difficult to do in that industry in particular, I'd imagine, because at least in terms of the media that is mainstream, you do see a very specific type of person gravitating towards that kind of a job. So I'd imagine that sitting with yourself and being like, okay, how do I get to be the best that I am? Probably is a whole thing all on its own.
Definitely. Because you really have to do some self-assessment, and some of that's not always really fun. You have to be like, well, I don't have natural double D's, and I'm not going to be a blonde, and I'm never going to be, I didn't even make it to 5'2". So, you can't get rid of freckles. Trust me, I've tried. So
see, I love freckles though. Freckles are
awesome. Everybody says that.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Have them. And then we'll come back and we'll have another conversation.
See, I had them when I was a kid and they went away, and I'm bummed about it.
Well, I have them all over except for the parts that don't really show in the sun. And because a lot of clubs have black lights. The pale part glows in the black light and the darker doesn't. So I had somebody, I can't remember where he was from. He was foreign. He was just visiting. And he asked me, and he was very polite about it. He was so sweet. But he thought that I actually had something wrong with me. He thought that I had like a disease, like I had like a skin disease, like some type of miscoloration.
Oh, no.
So,
Yeah, black lights can be great or not so great, depending on what you're looking for.
It's not great when you're like vampire pale.
That's fair. That is fair. And then I guess my last question for this section about exotic dancing specifically is, what are some societal level deconstructions that would make sex work in general a little bit easier and a little bit safer? So we talked a little bit at the beginning of the episode about how some organizations and some businesses might prey on young or inexperienced women in order to get them into the spotlight in that way. But there are other things that patrons do, or that other sex workers do to each other. Like there's a whole complex industry there that is suffering from some societal presuppositions about what sex work is. So in your experience, what are some things that maybe as a society we should be taking a closer look at?
Well, one of the things that a lot of people tend to make an assumption about, my assumptions about being in the industry, is that customers are, they're perverts and they're somehow screwed up, or they're all, predators. And they're not. We're talking about regular people. And it's not that I haven't met some bad dudes, because I really have. I've met a couple of guys that have really seriously frightened me. But the vast majority are not like that. They are, they're looking for company, or they're looking for entertainment, or they're, a lot of times it's not necessarily about sex. When you have a regular customer, and maybe not even a regular customer, but somebody that just had a hard day and just wants to talk to somebody that isn't their friend. There's an anonymous part to it when it comes to the customers. And most of them are really, really, really normal and kind and nice and respectful. And pretty much the same with the girls. It's a hard job. And so there's definitely a lot of drugs that are involved. There's a lot of competition. So there's a lot of like high school type antics that can go on between the girls. But, we're all insecure in one way or another. And this industry definitely brings out those insecurities when you're directly competing against somebody else. But as far as society goes, the way that they look at both the customers and the dancers is really not all that accurate. We're all people. The vast majority of people are sexual and are interested in sex, whatever that means for them. And that's not bad. We've painted sex as this dirty, horrible, like filthy thing. And it's not. And it doesn't have to be that way. Granted, I think that if it were more out in the open and nudity were more acceptable, and people were more, didn't have so many hangups about sex, I think that the sex industry would probably be damaged by that. I think that the taboo of it would probably make it lose some appeal. But for the most part, there's a lot of misconceptions. I spent 20 years dancing, and I don't hate men. I don't hate other women. I don't think that all men are predators or perverts. Not all strip club owners are scumbags. And not all dancers are drug addicts. So there's a lot of stereotypes that go with it, but I think that has a lot to do with the hangups about sex, which I think has a lot to do with religion, actually.
Exactly. And I'm excited that you brought that up, because that will be kind of the lead into our next interview segment about becoming an atheist and kind of that process of deconstruction. But I do want to touch on something that you mentioned about the competition between women and between sex workers in general, because obviously not all of them are women, but the stereotype in the mainstream about, sex workers is so different than the mainstream stereotype for, say, professional modeling, right? It's the same kind of competition. It's the same kind of relying on your body to, make you money essentially, but it's treated so differently. And the difference there, of course, is the sex part and the overt, acknowledgement that yes, there is a sexual component to this. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear maybe your thoughts on that and why maybe there's a discrepancy between professional modeling and sex work in terms of the stereotypes you brought up.
I just think it has to do with the sex part of it. For some reason, if you're a model, which of course I have a friend that modeled in Paris, and she's like 5 something ridiculous, dude. She's like almost 6 foot tall. And I'm never going to model in Paris. I mean, ever. But I really just think that it has to do with people's sex makes people uncomfortable. It just does. It touches on a very intimate part of us and part that we're not in polite society. We're not really allowed to talk about openly. And I think that it's when people are insecure or maybe they're not comfortable with themselves, it's a lot easier to attack than it is to actually try to understand or even admit that, maybe it turns you on and that scares you because you have been taught your whole life that it's dirty or bad or a sin or things like that. So I honestly just think the main difference has to do with the way that society in general views sex.
Yeah. Oh, I fully agree with that. Also, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from somebody's computer. So let's make sure that tamps down a bit.
Get that sorted. Yeah, I guess I wanted to point out or maybe just be curious about y'all's reaction to the idea that the dirtiness of sex as we're kind of deconstructing these ideas in culture, whether it's a feature or a bug. I recognize that sometimes we are really drawn to, dirty, filthy sex, and there's some appeal to that. And we're talking about strip clubs, and I know that at least some of the appeal sometimes can be that aspect of it. But I guess I'm not convinced that they would all suddenly close if we did have a more open and accepting cultural understanding of sexuality. I think about the fact that there's still restaurants, even though we're all comfortable with food, even though we can all cook ourselves, there is something nice about having a professional kind of specialize in that way. Is that comparison at all legitimate to the two of y'all?
It is to me. I mean, I don't think it would go away. I think it would hurt a little bit. And I think it would actually, I think it would hurt a little bit from the standpoint of the excitement of it. One of the things that makes it exciting is the fact that it's secret and it's something that, you're not like just going out to a restaurant and that's it. It's like, people, there's a reason that they have their bachelor parties there, because it is special. It is something that's exciting. And I think part of what makes it exciting is that people look at it as dirty. But I do think you're right. I don't think it would be completely decimated. I think COVID might have actually done more to hurt it than anything else probably could, because, this would be a really bad time to be, grinding on somebody coming from out of town or out of the country or, that idea is really close.
We did talk about that in a previous episode with Alice Little, I think, was our guest on that week. And she was talking about how the bunny ranches out in Nevada are kind of having to deal with this and, being safe about health precautions. Christy, to your point, I think you're right. And I would also say that probably maybe a more apt comparison would be prohibition, where the way that it was structured at the time would fall apart. Like the speakeasies that relied on people coming in surreptitiously to buy alcohol probably did see the end of prohibition as a bummer for their business. But it's just finding a new way to market it as something that is not necessarily secret, but rather something that you can go and just explore and appreciate.
Without the mob and the shady business practices, and with a little bit of okay, all right, I'm okay with this metaphor. Let's push for that, society. Come on.
There you go. Christy, do we want to jump into calls real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get it started with Michael in Florida. Michael, what's on your mind tonight?
Yeah. Hi, Erin, V, Chris. How are y'all doing tonight?
Hey, not too bad. What's on your mind?
Great. So basically, I was just calling because I actually remember asking this question last week in the Q&A on Discord, but for some reason I left, and I guess I got back in as you were answering it, Chris. I didn't really get the full answer. But yeah, so my topic is, or I guess my question is, when it comes to relationships, more specifically intimate relationships, how can you have, like, what would be a good way to have a relationship with someone who has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder? And if you are the one with BPD, how can you have good relationships with other people?
Yeah, that's definitely a complex question. So I want to just acknowledge at the outset that we'll offer some tips, some maybe places to look, but how to have a relationship is, I don't know, 50% of this show that we've been doing for 2+ years without really scratching the surface. So I want to just acknowledge the depth of what you're coming up against. And also that it can feel really stressful and overwhelming because you're going to get a lot of mixed advice, and that there are some really meaningful challenges here. But more than anything, I want to try and pull some of those labels out of here and just acknowledge that the best way to be in a relationship is to be in a relationship. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic problem that you're going to solve just by bringing in this like psychological or psychiatric language. So when we're talking specifically about borderline personality disorder, we're generally referring to a lot of trauma. We're generally referring to perhaps some discomfort around emotional flooding and some challenges that make it difficult to be in relationship because of those strong emotions. And so I think taking any kind of trauma-informed approach that recognizes in yourself or in your partner what some of those trauma responses can be, how those emotions can become overwhelming, and finding ways to really mitigate that. Coming with different coping strategies and communication strategies that allow you to stay connected, even if you're being overwhelmed by some pretty challenging psychological phenomena. Now, I know that's a very kind of clinical question. Maybe if you could let us know a little bit about what you're seeing and experiencing, we might be able to help guide you through it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not really in a relationship right now, but I guess with me, like there were a couple times in my life where I thought I did have borderline personality disorder, and I've been talking to a therapist about it, but she doesn't really think that I have borderline. Yeah, I guess like when we talk about things like being able to control my temper and stuff, like I do see that as something that I do struggle with and something that I want to work on personally. Whether or not it is a borderline symptom, like it's complicated because like I'm not a licensed psychologist or therapist or anything, but I guess like reading, like researching about BPD, I can understand why it would be very challenging to have like good relationships if you are the one with BPD, because a lot of it, like you point out, Chris, is a lot of emotional trauma. And I've heard it described as kind of like being someone like an emotional burn victim, just because of like the way people with BPD experience emotions is different. So yeah, like I'm not in a relationship.
Well, let me weigh in quickly if I can, just to say that, the metaphor of sensitivity, of being a burn victim, having experienced past trauma, and then maybe having a hypersensitivity, that plays. There's some validity there. But I want to be really careful when we're talking about how, we do this and people with borderline do that, and breaking people into categories, because borderline personality disorder and most of the things that we discuss in the mental health field aren't really yes or no answers. They're not necessarily check boxes. You may or may not qualify for the diagnostic criteria that statistically would lump you in with other people that have the qualifications for that diagnosis. But that's all just a bunch of word salad to say that we're people and we're individuals, and some of your characteristics might line up with those characteristics. And that's something to be curious about. Perhaps there's an opportunity for some personal growth and development. Sounds like you're working with a therapist who's helping with all of that. But let me discourage you from this idea that there's something wrong with you and therefore you need to go out, diagnose it, cure it, treat it and cure it. Because I just don't know that approach is going to get you the relationship or the love and affection that you're seeking for.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess maybe a lot of it, well, in my case personally, is when it comes to the emotional trauma, like I obviously don't want to go into too much detail about it because it's, public, but I do see some of the signs of that in my life. And while there is a good chance that I don't think I have BPD, I think that a lot of the emotional trauma, while I don't see it as a disease that needs to be cured, I do see it as something like one of those challenges in life where it's something that, while I don't think it makes me a bad person, or any mental disease makes anybody a bad person, I think it's one of those things that I do see myself working on just to live the life and have the happiness that I want.
Yeah, and if I can jump in real quick, Michael, I think that's the key here. And as out of my depth as I feel sometimes listening to Christy go on about the psychological elements of this, from what I can contribute, I would just say you seem like you have a really good idea of kind of what your personal struggles are and how it might impact the people around you, and a goal to address those and maybe get help where you need it. And those things by themselves, that self-awareness and that concern not only for self-betterment, but making sure that the people around you are being, cared for and addressed respectfully, those things by themselves sound like you're setting yourself up well for a relationship when and if you should decide to pursue one.
Well, good. Yeah, that sounds very encouraging. And I think that was a really good point, V, because I think that a lot of times when we think about especially mental disease, I think a lot of it is like, for example, if I'm the one who thinks that I have like a mental condition, then I can see how I fall into the trap of only thinking about how it affects me. What am I going to do? Mostly about myself. But a lot of times I think what could help me much better is thinking about how it affects other people. So like, not thinking less of myself, but kind of thinking of myself less and shifting a lot of that concern on the other people in my life.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, everybody has the capability to hurt other people. And that could be because of a mental condition. It could be because of a physical one. It could just be because we're all people and we all make mistakes sometimes. So I think a good balance of looking at yourself and taking care of yourself and getting the information you need, whether it's calling in to a show like this or going to therapy, as well as keeping an eye on other people around you and seeing what the impact of your existence has on other people. Those two things, I think, as far as I'm concerned, are beneficial when pursuing a relationship.
Yeah, and I'll just add before we let you go for the night that, as a stranger on the internet who doesn't know your story, who doesn't know what you're up against, what your goals are, or what you're looking for, I might encourage you to get out of your head, to get out into the world, to get into relationships, whether that's sexual and romantic or friendships of different sorts. And to enjoy those things, be mindful. If you make a mistake, do what you can to repair it, but try to keep it simple to the best of your ability, and try to see yourself as a human being interacting imperfectly with other human beings. I think that very simple medicine can go a long way here.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you for calling
We
in,
appreciate
Michael.
hearing from you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you have a great night.
So, guys, we have somebody who has written multiple books about sex, about breaking down barriers, about understanding yourself. So if you have any questions about sex work, about becoming an atheist as a sex worker, about pastry, hell, let's talk about pastry on the show, call in. That's at 512-991-9242. We do have open lines and we'd love to talk to you. Erin, let's jump into segment number 2 and talk a little bit about discarding dilapidated belief systems, which I believe is a phrase you've used that I really like. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that, how you became an atheist, and maybe even where that fell in the timeline of discovering sex work, as you did become an exotic dancer so early on?
Well, I don't know that there was some magical moment that I became an atheist. I think that it happened very, very early. When I was a kid, I was raised, in a Catholic family, or semi-Catholic. I call it soft Catholic, because we didn't really go to church except sometimes on holidays and weddings and funerals. And I never made it to communion. So even when we did go to church, and I'm the last of 6 kids. So my 5 brothers and sisters, the ones that were still around when I was, they would go up and get their cracker and their wine. And I would sit back the little heathen, and not really, we just never really pursued that part of it. And for me, I was always I was really kind of a pain in the butt as a kid, because I asked a lot of questions, and there were a lot of things that just didn't jive for me. Where I would ask things and people would be able to explain it up to a point. And then when you keep asking, and then you start getting into morality questions, well, why did God flood the whole world? And then they start getting mad. And then you get sent to the corner, and then they don't want you in Sunday school anymore. So for me, I really called crap pretty early. Especially when it came to the blood sacrifice and the rituals and things like that. So the real base of Christianity for me was debunked really pretty much with Santa Claus, because the answer for Santa Claus was magic, and the answer for God was also magic. And so I think I kept the higher power, spirituality, there's something else out there kind of vibe for a while, out to my early 20s. But atheist for me was a bad word. That was worse than the F word. Sure. You were going to hell. You were a Satanist. Now I think that's actually really funny, because you literally can't be a Satanist if you don't believe in. So anyway, which is always funny when you tell people that, because they're like, what? Just think about it. Just take 2 seconds and think about it. Yeah, it's pretty quick. And when I really decided that I was an atheist, and that I would identify as an atheist, is when my nephew passed away. He was 8. He had cancer. They'd been treating him for about 6 years. And of course we prayed, because what do? I mean, you can't do anything. You can go and get the treatments. You can listen to the doctors. You can give him the best life he can have. And you can pray. I mean, what else can you do? And so that was the last time that I really prayed. And when he passed, it was that was really the point when I started looking and I started like educating myself. And that was when I found out the definition of atheist. And I was like, well, that's not scary at all. In fact, it's really not even much. All it says is that you don't believe in any gods, not even the God or this God or that God. I'd love to believe in Thor, but Chris Helmsworth will do.
Yeah, that'll work.
but I started reading, and I first started reading about souls and consciousness. And then I saw, well, there's no proof that there's actually a soul. And I actually found comfort in the fact that there wasn't somebody that made my nephew suffer for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I actually felt better about that, that I could let that go. The problem was that I couldn't say anything about it because everybody's still talking about heaven. And everybody's still talking about God taking him and he's an angel and all these religious things. And I didn't think that. So I read more. It's pretty much been my answer to everything in life. When things get hard, I tend to just stick my face in a book and pretend like there's nothing else going on. So I read books like, I started with the science one. I read God No by Penn Jillette, which is a bit of a ride. I read God Delusion, Christopher Hitchens. I went through the whole gambit of all that kind of stuff.
The Atheism 101 reading list.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I got kind of angry. I got to say, I think for a little while, I spent some time as a militant atheist because I felt so liberated. I felt like I was able to finally be like, you know what, man, I don't have to pretend to believe this shit anymore. And that's really okay. The problem for me was really finding acceptance. And I had felt like I had sort of already done that dance, pun intended, I guess, because I had to find acceptance as a dancer. And now I had to find acceptance as a non-believer. And that was actually worse. Like,
interesting. Talk about that a little bit.
When you challenge people's beliefs, I think it really damages them to the core. I think it really challenges them to actually look inside themselves and ask, is it fair that a child would have a devastatingly painful disease for 3/4 of their life? Is it fair that, a good portion of the world is starving or, being abused or hurt in these horrific ways? And there's supposed to be some supreme being that has control over all of this. I think that's really scary. And I think one of the scariest things is coming to the acceptance that there may not be an afterlife, that this is all we have. And for me, that was also very liberating because it made me really value every moment that I have alive. It made me say, you know what, man, it's really rough right now, but I'm alive and that's what I got. And I got this time and that's all I got. And one day there'll just be nothing. So I better do what I need to do right now.
I've been telling people I need a nihilist meditation app that just tells you how insignificant you are in a very gentle and soothing voice. I'd buy that in a minute. Can we talk a little bit about kind of how the atheism and the sex work intersected? Because I have this, tell me if I'm off base here, or maybe I'm entering into a territory that you don't know about, but I have this idea that people probably assume that a lot of sex workers are atheists, and there is this natural progression between, hey, I'm an atheist, that means that I'm going to reject certain ideas about sex, and therefore maybe this industry is more interesting to me, or now an open opportunity. Do you happen to know in your time as an exotic dancer these 20 years, did you come across, were more people atheist? Were there still substantially a large number of Christian people in this industry, or how did you see that makeup falling out?
I wouldn't say there was a lot of fundamentalist Christians, like really, I wouldn't say that at all, but there's a lot of higher power, universe, spirituality, karma, all those things. There's a lot of that to the point where I wasn't necessarily comfortable all the time, really depending on the context and where I was, but I was not always comfortable saying that I didn't believe in things. And, you know, like if I would have, and actually I read about this, I had a really, really bad night, and no crap, it was 2:30 in the morning. We had a half hour left, and some guy comes in and just gave me a few $100s, and it basically saved my night. And it was awesome. And I walked in the dressing room, and there was only one other person there. Cause I mean, seriously, like the lights were on and we were ready to go home. And I told her, cause I was so relieved, because I was bummed. I was like, this is ridiculous. I spent all night doing nothing and making nothing. And she goes, well, somebody's looking out for you, you know, or something like that. And I let her have that. I didn't say no. I got lucky with some drunk guy that came in the end and, you know, happened to have some money burning a hole in his pocket and was too drunk to realize how much he spent. But I wasn't going to push back on that, because I guess I find there's a certain type of belief that's a lot more benign than feeling like you're, you know, going to hell and those kinds of things. But I do think that lingering Christianity, as people that were raised that way, does contribute to the guilt that girls may feel when they get into that kind of industry. And I do think that contributes to drug and alcohol use. Because what is really prevalent is girls that feel like they need to have a few drinks, or they need to have whatever their particular chemical is, to be able to perform. And that's something that I stress in every piece of my writing about dancing, is if you can't do it sober, you need to not do it at all, period. End of story. And I think that really applies to any job now that I'm working a regular job, because the only time I've really felt like drinking is now that I'm doing office work. I'm like, wow, glass of wine at 11 o'clock in the morning sounds great.
Oh, my
Feels fair.
goodness.
Feels fair.
Well, it's COVID.
Yeah.
It's airport rules. You can drink wine at 11. That's fine.
So
that is so interesting,
Yeah.
though. So you've seen kind of, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking back to when I was still no longer fundamentalist, but still very Christian, and I would need to be drunk in order to have sex at first. Like, it needed to be this thing where I needed to loosen up, get out of my own head, stop the lingering guilty thoughts before I could even think about doing that. And it really did take an intentional stopping point and starting over to be able to realize, oh, this is something that I can do sober, and I don't need to worry about being, you know, under the influence in any way in order to appreciate or engage in this. But that's very insightful.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of, I got actually really upset somebody, and it was when I was writing about ghosts. I was writing about because I ghost hunted for probably a good 15 years with the friend that I mentioned earlier. We went to all sorts of, and we had loads of fun, and it's the weirdest thing, never saw a ghost. Go figure.
Interesting.
What?
Did you go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania ever?
No, but New Orleans. I spent 2 weeks
Oh.
in New Orleans, and I grew up in gold country, right, where gold was first discovered. So the gold rush. So, and her family has a cabin at Donner Lake, which is a horrific story if you want to look it up. It's really actually terrible.
It gets even worse when you do research and realize they didn't even need to.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. It's really bad. But there's I've been to a lot of haunted graveyards and places like that. And yeah, weird thing, never saw any of them, 15 years. But I actually got in a bit of an argument, and she stopped talking to me like indefinitely when I told her that ghosts didn't exist. She got really, really, really mad at me. And I was in the middle of writing, so it was all in my head, and I was thinking about it, and I had gone through like the research and how to debunk and kind of deconstruct why people believe in ghosts and how you fool yourself into believing in ghosts and things like that. So yeah, I really, really upset her. One of the other things that I found really prevalent is things that like the pseudosciences really seem to take hold in my particular industry, or my former industry. When it comes to chiropractors, when it comes to, the essential oils was a big thing. Those kinds of fads really take on a lot. Crystals. I have somebody that puts her stones out in the moon to charge. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh yes, I've been at that stage before. I've certainly done that more than
So, I think there's some lingering beliefs there. But I can't say that I really know a lot of former dancers that are atheists. I really don't. I know that I've probably gotten just as much, probably not as hostile, but I've definitely gotten a lot of angry comments and people that are like, oh, well, how could you believe there's just nothing? And I'm like, well, because there isn't anything that's given me any reason to believe that there is something.
That's all we have evidence for, right? Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. That is fascinating. And honestly, I could talk about this all day, but we do have a call on the line, and former publishing geek that I am, I want to talk about your trip to becoming an author and kind of what those particular challenges are like. So Christy, do we want to take another call?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's touch base with Anthony in Tennessee. Anthony, you had a question for Erin. Well, what can we help you with tonight?
Yeah, I did. First of all, thank you guys for doing this. And so I'm going to ask you a question that sort of has to do with my own experience, because I grew up in entertainment. And I've found that because of that, I would sort of assign my own bullcrap to my own romantic partners, even though they didn't have the same expectations that I did.
Sure.
So really the question comes down to, have you experienced issues in personal romantic relationships that stemmed from having an idealistic view of yourself or a professional emphasis on your physical appearance? And then if so, did you have self-care practices that sort of helped you combat that?
I don't think that I've really run into a lot of that. I've been in a long-term relationship really since I was 20. And when it comes to, like, I didn't really date a lot as a dancer here and there. And then when I did, it was casual. And so I wasn't really, there wasn't really a lot of depth there at all.
Sure.
But I guess when it comes to how I view myself now, I'm very different. There's a performer me, and there's just me. And I guess in my personal relationship, that person is really only exposed to me and the way I am. And I'm not really, I'm not really worried about how I look. Maybe at first, because you're just dating, but not really after that.
Sure. No, that totally makes sense. It's just, you have done something that a lot of people would consider sort of an intimate space in a very public way. And it was just, I just kind of wanted to get an idea of if those two things had ever like cross-pollinated, but that's an interesting perspective.
They don't really. It was really just it was very separate. It was very much like leaving to go to work, and I got to work, and that's what I did.
Cool.
And finding a partner that's understanding about that and doesn't, there's no jealousy there. I mean, you really have to have a strong partner, number one, and you have to have a partner that understands what you do and is willing to accept that. And they need to do that before you become in a relationship. That for me, it was kind of a deal breaker. It wasn't like I hit it. It was like, this is what I am. You can take me or not. There's 4 billion other dudes out there. So.
Sure. Oh, cool. That's a great answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah, we so appreciate you calling in tonight. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anthony.
Yeah, it absolutely did. All right.
All right. Take care.
All right. We also have a call from somebody whose voice ACA viewers might recognize. I know he's still in the screening room, but I think we can trust Johnny. Do we want to talk with Johnny?
Yeah, let's bring him on. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Oh, I'm doing well. Is this Christy?
Yeah, you've got Christy V and Erin. We've got you live on air. Hope you don't mind.
Oh yeah, I love it. Yeah, I had a really important question. I wanted to call. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I think V might be.
Yeah,
it's been established. There's evidence.
It is known.
Okay, so you want to know my question? Should Should I just come right out? I want to come to the point and
go
ask
for
a
it.
question and see what you all think about it. Okay, so we all know that on Star Trek The Next Generation, Guinan and Jean-Luc Picard have a kind of, I don't know, like not a flirtatious, but like a deep connection that may border on maybe a romantic connection. Okay?
Okay.
Yes, we all know that. Yes, absolutely.
We all know that. Guinan, of course, being played by the incomparable Whoopi Goldberg, and of course JLP being Patrick Stewart. I have to think about it because I always think of him as Picard. But she's thousands of years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's, 60 maybe? So
About that, yeah.
that's huge. It's a huge age difference, okay? She has thousands of years. This is like the Edward and Bella age dynamic. Is that something that as we watch, let's say, fiction or something like that, where there is like an almost immortal character who has an interest in ultimately a very finite, alived being, should we be creeped out by that? Can you ever have like a balanced relationship when somebody's thousands of years older than
Well, let me jump in and let V talk Star Trek and some of these other pieces, but I just want to point out at the start that a balanced relationship is not necessarily a universal goal. It's perfectly okay to have a imbalance in a relationship, perhaps because of somebody's level of experience, their level of income, the strength of their personality, whatever else. It's not inherently abusive to command more power in a relationship, and I think that's an important place to start. V, what are you kind of clicking on here?
Well, for me, I find it an interesting question, Johnny. Very intellectual, so I appreciate you bringing this level of rigor to the conversation. For me, I think that
I was drinking wine, eating cheese.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think right now the thing that's come into my mind is consent, right? And the ability to consent and understanding what that means. So for me, as long as that has been established, I really don't feel like I have to have a say in age gaps and the age disparity in a relationship. I know I tend to prefer older partners, and I know some of my friends who tend to prefer younger ones, and it's totally fine as long as there's that general understanding of, hey, this is what we're getting out of it, and this is what we expect of each other. In Guinan and Picard's case, though, it's different, I think, because it's not overtly sexual. It almost, to me, strikes the tone of mentor-mentee in a way. So Guinan being his mentor more than anything else. So I think if we're going in that direction, we could even talk about the different ways that age differences could influence intimate relationships, whether they're sexual or romantic or platonic, and kind of the different notes, I suppose, that would inspire in the individual relationships.
Yeah, I think Dan Savage's campfire rule plays really well here. The campfire rule is the idea that anytime you are in a relationship with somebody who may be more vulnerable than you, perhaps they're younger, perhaps they have less power, or there's something else about the dynamic that puts them in a vulnerable position. That's not an inherently bad thing, but you want to make sure to be kind and conscientious to that person and leave them better off than you found them. However long that relationship works, if it is benefiting them, if they're walking away from it cleaner, healthier, happier, more informed, or whatever else than when you met them, then that's a successful interaction. You know, we're all getting cuts and scrapes in all of our relationships to some extent, but there's still opportunity to grow no matter what the dynamic. So if you can be in a relationship with somebody and leave them off better than you found them, then I think you can call that a success.
I like that. I like the sound of that. What about in the example of Neelix and Kes, where Neelix is, let's say he's in his 30s and Kes is 3 years old?
Well, yes, but we have to take into consideration that the Okampa do age very substantially faster. And so 2 years for an Okampa would be the equivalent to 18 to 20 in human years, or I'm assuming Talaxian years. But it's enough posturing and nerddom for one.
Well, I think the important component is this person able to consent? You highlighted that, V, and maybe the larger question is, as we're consuming this media, it's super fun to do like the Jesse Gender deconstruct and what can we learn about ourselves through media question. But I think the question of, should we be squigged out? Should we be rewriting our media? And you use the Bella and Edward metaphor. And I think that's a good one to look at, because Bella is not just underage in those stories, but is actually at a place in her life where I don't believe that she's able to give any kind of meaningful consent, at least not early on. Before I betray like my intimate knowledge of that series, I guess it's just important to recognize that as we're presenting art, as we're creating this media culture, that we're always being mindful of the way we portray consent. Not to say that every fictional story needs to be good or a good model in that way, but if the tone presents that as problematic, then that's really interesting. If the tone presents that as beautifully romantic, maybe we should be really careful before we put that in front of thousands of teenage girls.
And there's also...
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, V.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, kind of taking this in another direction, and then we'll have to leave off, unfortunately, and pick this up when we talk about Star Trek in some future podcast that will undoubtedly happen, Johnny. But
I hope so.
I think if we're worried about human-alien relationships in the Star Trek verse that might border on non-consensual or have a power dynamic, and we are, I would bring up perhaps Riker and Troy, honestly, because of her Betazoid mind reading and emotional sensitivity. She might actually be in a position where she could manipulate the situation. So rather than age difference, I would say in situations where there might be a power dynamic in terms of extra abilities that maybe one person doesn't possess.
Yeah, but he also knew what she was about, when they met and they became Imzadi. I think that, again, it comes down to, and Christy really said it, and so did Juvi, it comes down to consent, knowing consent and what you're getting into, and willing to accept the consequences of that situation. And if it works for you, you continue, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. You don't.
There you go.
Right?
I think that's a good motto going forward.
I'm going to go back to my wine and my cheese now, and I'm going to think more about Guinan and Kess and all the other good people on Star Trek.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much for calling in, Johnny.
You take care tonight.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
For those of you who don't know Johnny is the producer and one of the main hosts of the Nonprofits, which is another ACA show that is coming back, I believe, next week. And he's also going to be co-hosting on AXP with Matt on Sunday. So if you would like to see more of Johnny and call in to his shows with Star Trek questions, I know he will appreciate that. All right. Let's dive into this final segment. Erin, I hope we didn't lose you with the.
I've never actually watched Star Trek.
Wow.
All right. Well, we'll have another discussion another time then.
Okay.
So we've talked a little bit about becoming a dancer. We talked about becoming an atheist, but one of the reasons why you were on our radar is because you've written several books, one of them about debunking and deconstructing myths and things that maybe not be true. And also most recently, one that kind of melds your experience in the sex work industry with your opinions on religion and on atheism. So I'm curious to talk a little bit about becoming an author and what that looks like for you. So do you want to maybe first start out talking about how you came to the idea to write about these experiences of yours? Because I know earlier you had mentioned that you came to write this last book because of somebody you met at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but you had already written 2 books prior. So how did that journey kind of start for you?
Well, I've always read. Books have been kind of my first love. They've been my escape. I was a kid in the 80s, so, there wasn't a lot on TV. So I read a lot. I've always wanted to be a writer.
It was on TV in the 80s? Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, no. I know. I just wasn't. I had brothers. They made me watch Star Wars, and that was literally the last time I watched Star Wars in the 80s. And I really haven't looked back.
That is okay.
But
giving you a hard time. Continue.
I expected it. It's okay. Maybe I deserve it. I don't know. But I probably won't know because the likelihood of me watching it now is pretty small. But like I said, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, so books were really a lot of times my friends. That was my go-to. And so I always wanted to be a writer. I never really thought I could. After I started dancing, I think I was about 10 years in, maybe 15. That's when the idea in my head started coming, hey, maybe you should write about dancing. Everybody always says, oh, you should write a book. And nobody really does, right? And what really kind of kicked me in the butt to start writing my first book actually had to do with religion, kind of ironically, because I didn't realize that it would end up where it is now. But we had a Christian group that would come into the clubs that would try to rescue the girls. And in our local area, I happened to know the woman that ran it. I worked with her when I first started dancing. We were never really friends at all. But she basically portrayed it as all these girls need to be rescued and that none of them wanted to be there, that if you were a dancer or in any kind of sex work, nobody loves you. You obviously need Jesus, and nobody respects you. You can't be happy or healthy or anything like that. And it really, really, really made me angry. That you did drugs, and it was like, no, you did drugs. You did that. And you were unhappy and you felt unloved and disrespected. And apparently you needed Jesus. And so I finally started writing, and I thought, I'm just going to write my story. And it's probably unfair to put all the blame on her in particular, because there was a lot in the media, Dr. Phil. So let's put a big chunk of this on Dr. Phil. Thanks, Dr. Phil. Because I got tired of seeing that on TV, that same stereotype. And she was now exploiting that, talking about exploitation, and saying that some of these girls were actually trafficked. So in getting money for her organization, she was saying that, we're saving these women and we're stopping them from being sex trafficked. And it was like, no, she knows better than anybody else that there's no traffic victims. Wayfair's not selling and shipping kids to the strip clubs. That's not how that works.
It needs to be said. I don't know why it needs to be said, but I appreciate you saying it.
It does. Because she actually I'm not friends with her, but I happened to see her comment on a thread about Wayfair and how horrible it was. Oh my God. Somebody has to stop them. I'm like, well, order a cabinet and call the FBI. How about that? Stopped. So, but I just got tired of the stereotypes, and I got tired of the misconceptions, and some of them are earned. There's some horrible things that happen in the sex industry, but it's not always like that. And it really irritated me. And so it irritated me enough to start writing. And I wrote this whole book, and I started soliciting publishers and agents. And I got I don't even know how many rejections, probably not as many as I, should have, before I just decided to self-publish. And then as I started to think about quitting dancing, I wrote a second book, which is basically like a series of essays that talk about the different aspects of the industry, how to deal with rejection, how to deal with misogyny, and how to exploit misogyny, how to deal with those types of things. Like I have a chapter on fetishes and things like that. And then I got involved with the atheist community because there was a church. Once again, if they they came to me, if they had just left me alone, I would be here. But my son, it started to affect him. There was a church that was giving away bikes to his whole school, but you had to go to a church event to get your bike. And the school sent home flyers, and I ended up I had been following FFRF for a while, and I ended up contacting them, and they wrote a letter, and they got it stopped. They stopped. I think the event still happened, but they got the school to stop doing that. which was good because it put my son in a weird position, because I was like, well, you're not going to this event. Number one, you don't need a bike. And number two, this, now you're a target of bullies because you're the only kid that didn't get the bike because your mom didn't let you go so it was just all bad. And I ended up submitting an article to them. They published it, and they had their convention close to me in San Francisco. So I thought, you know what, why not? So I went to the convention, met my chapter president, and she told her about my other books. And she said, well, how fast can you write a third one? And that was how my third book was born. Turns out about 8 months.
Nice. That is not a bad record.
Yeah. So it was, I guess I was a reluctant activist. It was not necessarily my intention, but it was really born out of protecting my son. And at least my third book was. But my first one was definitely a bit of anger and annoyance at the stereotypes and things that were, I was tired of people always asking me, are you a drug addict? Are you a prostitute? Does your boyfriend, play guitar and sit on the couch and smoke pot all day? It got old. So.
Oh, for sure. And now the response is, you can read my multiple books on the subject and fuck all the way off.
I tell you what, man, it's one of the reasons why I quit right after my third book came out, because it was like, you know what, man, I did this. I wrote about it. I was able to tie in, some of the activism, the misinformation, the conspiracies, the part about really examining yourself to be able to create a better life by letting go of some of the things that you may have, your dilapidated beliefs, if you will, about not only the world and beyond it, but about yourself. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff that I think we have a lot of hangups that that hold us back. And so that's really, it's really where it came from.
I'm curious a little bit about the editing and marketing process for the books that you've written, not just the last one, but, all the books that have to deal with these very sensitive topics. And I know that you mentioned getting rejected a bunch of times at the beginning. From my own experience, it does feel like both the editing teams and the marketing teams that would have been involved in publishing these books would have had very strong opinions about, the directions that they'd be going in, or maybe the target audience that they should be focusing on. Can we talk a little bit about maybe what that experience was like? And did you feel supported by your team in getting your message across, or did you feel maybe like you had to fight for it a little bit?
No, I felt totally supported because I did it all myself. So I self-published. I had been working with a friend of mine on my first book as an editor who had just gone through an editing class. And so she was going with me chapter through chapter, and she didn't have any opinions on anything. But by the time we were done with the whole thing, she had been running it through an editing program. And so what happened was she changed a lot. We had talked a little bit before about sarcasm font. Well, she changed a lot of, and I don't think she did it. I think it was a program or something that she had used that made everything grammatically correct, but it completely changed the tone, and in some cases drastically changed the meaning. So what I wrote didn't make sense anymore, basically.
Oh, goodness.
So my first book definitely could have used a professional editor in that respect. And so there's still a couple of mistakes in that book, because I rejected all of the edits, because it changed the entire thing. It wasn't even the same book. It didn't have the same meaning. So I let that go. My second book it's really short. So it's only like 65 pages. And that was a little easier for me because I was kind of used to I had my own process at that point. My third book, the editor is actually the chapter president of the FFRF here in my area, Judy Saint, ironically. Definitely somebody I would consider a mentor and a muse. Certainly one of the greatest people to come into my life out of all of this. And I write about that actually in the third book and how we met. And because I was worried about people at the convention looking at me weird because I was a dancer. And I felt so I felt such a sense of community when I was sitting there and, you know, Dan Barker singing and playing the piano and doing his thing. And I was like, God, this is so awesome. And I turned to her, and we just met. I turned to her and I was like, this is really great. And she looked at me and she said, you're home. And I tell you what, that was one of the most profound moments in all of this. And after that, we started to work together, and I absolutely felt supported. She kept me on message. She helped me figure out what to say and what people wanted to hear from me, and helped me really hone my message as to what I wanted to say and how I was able to tie in dancing to atheism, humanism, actually, and also debunking pseudoscience and all that other stuff. So the third book was definitely probably more close to a traditional type publishing experience, but it's also self-published.
Okay, wonderful. And hey, that is definitely an option to go with. I will never diss working with freelance editors, working with freelance marketers. Those people know their stuff. So yeah, that is awesome. And that experience of being at a convention for the first time and just feeling that community is very close to home as well. In fact, I think it was profound. We were going to be on the same stage at the AA Con that would have happened in 2020 had COVID not hit. So I'm glad we're actually able to meet up and to talk. Before we wrap up, I do have a final question for you, which is, are there other books you want to write? Is there anything else that you feel you need to say? Any other messages you want to get out there? Or maybe are you thinking about going in a new direction?
Well, both of those things. So because the atheist, agnostic, free thought, whatever community has been so supportive of me, I mean, like just incredibly, more than I ever thought, and far beyond Twitter, just even our local groups. We have a blasphemy breakfast that we used to do. That was awesome. I will always be a part of this community. They're basically what led me to where I am. So I've written a few articles for Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I will continue to do that as long as they'll take me. And I've written a couple of articles for some other publications as well. And I've started writing fiction, which is really what if I want to go back to like when I was a little girl, that's what I've always wanted to do. So I have 2 short stories that have been published now. I have a third one coming out in January, and I'm actually wrapping up a novel that I'm writing with another author that's actually kind of like a crime type thing, like a murder mystery type horror thing. That actually will have a traditional publisher. So talk to me in a little while and ask me the same question, and I will have a different answer, I'm sure.
Well, we'll have to have you back on.
So fiction is kind of where I'm going. Like I said, I will continue to support the cause and be a voice. And at a bare minimum, I want to make sure that I'm always adding support to people and let them know that they can be comfortable saying that they don't believe, and that there is a community, or there are friends, even if it's not a community. Obviously, atheists are all over the freaking place. But there's somebody else out there, and you don't have to continue to believe in things that you don't, because that was, I think, one of the most damaging things for me, was constantly feeling like I had to be fake. And I really want people to know that you don't have to do that anymore. But I am planning on moving into the realm. I guess I'm already there into fiction, but writing is really something I'm passionate about. And fiction has been a lot of fun for me over the last 6 months or so.
Oh, that's awesome. That's good to hear. I'm all about that. And honestly, fiction is one of the most powerful ways to get messages across in those sneaky ways where you're like, haha, I made you like a character who you would judge in real life. So that's really exciting. Yeah, we'll have to have you back on once that's out and you can pitch it.
I have to learn how to do that. I'm not very good at that.
You've done good so far. Okay, well, thank you so much for being on the show tonight, Erin. I really appreciate having you on, and the honesty and the just the enlightenment that you brought to the show tonight was really, really enlightening, and I really enjoyed it. Can we look at the crew cam real quick and pull that up so we could thank our lovely crew for everything that they've been doing tonight?
Yeah, I got a couple people training, got a full house of people working tonight. Thank you all so very much.
Look at that hardworking kitty. All right. So, Erin, where can people find you if they want to look for your books, if they want to look for all of the stuff that's coming out soon?
Well, all of my books are available on Amazon for either paperback or Kindle, and also on Audible. You can find my books there. You can check out everything I do on erinlouis.com. Make sure you spell it right. Otherwise, you're going to get the lead singer from Stained. I have some blogs there, links to my articles, as well as other interviews and places where I'll be at or virtually be at, as the case may be. And then also on Twitter and Facebook.
Wonderful. And Christy, where can people find us if they want to get in touch for more sex loveliness?
Yeah. Well, of course, people know already that they can find us on Twitter. We are at Secular Sex, as well as our fan group on Facebook, which you and I frequent pretty often, V. So if people are wanting to ask a question, start a conversation, it's a really great place to connect with the incredible audience here, even after the chat closes. Of course, there's our Discord group, which is always going. Yeah, what else comes to mind, V?
I did want to mention, now that we brought up that Facebook group, usually when we do our mailbag episodes, which is when we sit down and sift through all of the questions you send us via email, we're starting to do that on the Facebook group as well. So I believe the mods have already put out a post or two soliciting questions for next week's episode, which is going to be dedicated to answering fan questions. So if you haven't already gone to the Facebook group and asked whatever you want to ask us, feel free to submit your question there, or to email us at sex@atheist-community.org.
Absolutely. And there are a number of ways to get in touch. There are also a number of ways to support the show. You can certainly check out your Secular Sexuality merch at our Teespring store, as well as our Patreon to continue to keep the show going. We are incredibly grateful to everybody who's taking the time to watch this show, especially grateful for the folks who are jumping into the chat and participating in the culture. And we hope that you'll help us keep the lights on as you're able.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to dive in and do something I've never done before. So while you're at it, Christy's so excited. So while you're browsing through Amazon looking for Erin's books, or just kicking back with some wine and cheese and thinking about Guinan, I encourage you all to take a minute and give yourselves a big old orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.